Welcome, fantastic friends, to the new episode of the Fancast at 4 podcast, the number one Fantastic Four fancasting podcast on the internet.
Presumably.
I'd say full tilt boogly. I'm Dan Bettenhausen.
And I am Jack Mayer.
And we are your hosts as we venture into the what-ifs of Marvel's first family, who will be appearing in Phase 6 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
With Matt Shakman set to direct the MCU's Fantastic Four film, we still can explore what it would be like if a different director was behind the camera and who might they cast.
This week, we are excited to have a returning guest to the podcast, Patrick Gibson. Patrick, so glad you could join us again. For those who may have not gotten to hear our second episode ever, where we talk Quentin Tarantino, Patrick, would you mind telling our listeners a little bit more about yourself?
Sure thing, Dan. It's great to be back. Been a long time coming.
It has.
Some might say. But yeah, I am a sort of long-time movie guy. Again, for those that weren't here for the last podcast, I'm not very much a big into the comic space, but really interested in exploring how the MCU could be handled as a film property, given how it's sort of been mishandled.
I will also say it's definitely been a bit of time for Dan and myself as well.
Right.
Been on a bit of a hiatus this summer, much like a TV show. But the fall season is just starting. And with Patrick introduced, I think we should take an opportunity to introduce the person we are featuring in today's podcast. This week, we are featuring an American television host and producer who has been in the business since 1996, but has found most recent success with a show that premiered in 2000 and is currently on its 45th season and has produced more than 650 episodes.
This show was one of the first highly rated reality programs, and on top of its many award wins and nominations, it has been nominated for 63 Emmy Awards, and this person has won Outstanding Host for a reality or reality competition program for 4 consecutive years. It was considered one of the 100 greatest TV shows of all time by Time Magazine in 2007 and by TV Guide in 2013. This week, we're talking Jeff Probst, host and producer of Survivor.
What a perfect episode for us to get back into with Survivor.
I mean, by this point, we are, they're going to be out probably around episode 3 of season 45, the new season getting back into the swing of things. But, I mean, this show has such a rich history and has evolved a lot since its inception in 2000. So I guess I'm going to turn it over to you for you both to talk about it for a little bit, like your thoughts on it. Patrick, I know you are more old school. You started way back when it started. Jack, you're more of a new convert to Survivor and are getting and kind of rewatching seasons. So I'm going to kind of let you both talk about your introductions to the show, what you love about the show, and so on.
I think at this point, you can almost call me a lapsed fan of Survivor. Winners of War is really the last time I tuned in even semi-regularly to it. I think it's sort of diverted from what attracted me to it originally as more of a social experiment and social game. And as I've grown older, the overemphasis that has been placed on strategic aspects has sort of soured me to it. And I think there are plenty of variations of this game, not just in the United States, but worldwide, that bring their own unique flavors to it. For example, the Australian version of Survivor is probably some of my favorite who have ever been produced. But I think, again, I'm lapsed for 2 reasons. One, I think I consumed a lot of it a few years ago and was really, really deep into the weeds and sort of needing to take a step back. And it's just something I haven't really found the time to go back into. But also, again, because I think it's moved away, especially the American version, it's moved away from what made it a cultural phenomenon in the first place.
So, Patrick, that really deep into the weeds of Survivor is right where I'm at currently. Fun fact, this show is technically older than I am. So I have not been watching this show since Borneo. I was not one of those people whose dream it was to be on Survivor since I was a little kid. But about 7 or 8 months ago, my best friend at college and I were looking for something to watch. And my roommate, who is a massive Survivor fan, suggested we start watching Heroes versus Villains. And we were hooked pretty instantly. Over the course of these past 8 months, we have watched a total of 18 seasons of Survivor together, not in any particular order. It started with Heroes versus Villains, and then we bounced to Micronesia, and then to David versus Goliath, and then Winners at War. It was the most insane sort of trajectory of Survivor watching, and it was really just kind of based around either concepts that we found interesting or players that we liked that we wanted to see their other seasons of. Like, we watched Micronesia after Heroes versus Villains because my friend was obsessed with Parvati. So I fucking love Survivor. I think it is easily the best reality TV show still airing, although I do love The Amazing Race. That will always have a special place in my heart. But there's just something so great about Survivor and the game mechanics. I do really like the strategy aspects of the game. Obviously, the social interactions are the most important. And I think with the 90-minute episodes, and especially last season and this season, we seem to be getting more back into the social aspects of the game being prominent. Already in the new season, I have several characters that I really like and I'm really interested in following. Not for their strategy, but just because I think they're good TV. I think the other problem was that casting was only casting fans of Survivor, and they're still doing that. But I do miss the days of, like, Survivor China, where you could have Courtney on that show who has no idea what Survivor is, who hates being there every second, but who somehow makes it to the final three. I think we need to bring people like that back onto the show, and it seems like we may be moving into that direction. So I'm excited to see where this new era goes, given the last season that aired and this season that's currently airing.
Yeah, I guess for me, I agree with you. I agree with you both in a lot of ways. The things I like, I do love the game aspect. I like that they are taking the challenges are always interesting, complex. I do think they need to vary them up sometime, because I think there's a tendency for very smart players to be able to learn them who are going into it. That's a whole nother conversation. I do miss having clear-cut villains, though. I think for the longest time in this quote-unquote new school era, we don't have any villains. We have some maybe antagonistic players or players that are annoying, but no one that's just playing outright villainous. Your Russell Hanses, your Johnny Fairplays. But I think the thing I love most about this show, and you have water cooler TV these days, but this is still, to me, probably the most communal show that I'm a part of. There are 3-4 different groups of friends or kind of cliques in my life that are associated with each other who I can talk about Survivor with. Granted, a lot of them are fellow LGBTQ members, but that's again another thing. But like, I have a friend and former coworker who we draft the season's cast a couple days before the season starts, and we rib each other when someone gets voted out. We have another friend who I'll just text back and forth during the episode, like, oh, what did you think of that? What did you think of that? Are you watching live? Okay, I'll catch you later after you let me know when you watch it. It is, to me, the most communal show. And Jack, I agree with you. I think casting is getting better over these last couple seasons, though I think some gripes I still have with this new era is the amount of time they're on the island. I know it's cheap. I know Fiji's great, but I wish we had some different locales. I wish they were there for like the 30 some days that they were
39
around.
days.
Like, or even just some middle. And I wish there was kind of a recalibration, not so much like early Survivor days, but I'm tired of all the twists and challenges. Sometimes I just want, okay, you're out there, you need to make do with what you have and then do the challenges. Like, not so many immunity idols. Again, I'm going on this rant, but all in all, the heart of the show to me is still there, and I'm very glad it is.
I dislike that Jeff Probst makes himself the main character of the show now. But
after 45 seasons, I imagine, someone's got to be.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't keep bringing Boston Rob back every single season.
Much as Jeff would like to.
Yes, much as he would like to.
I mean, we did have the Island of the Idols. I mean, I don't know if it gets bigger than that.
Not really. Literally and figuratively. But that's the thing, is that, and hearing all of this is interesting, because I think one of the things I didn't mention, and when I say getting into the weeds, I think for me, there was a period of time where I got to look behind the curtain. I look at how the sauce was getting made for Survivor. And that's something that I also think put me off of it. Just being able to sit down and watch and enjoy it anymore is something I can't do. I am vociferously studying the edit and being like, okay, these are the people I need to pay attention to, rather than just letting the characters wash over me and letting myself enjoy what's coming on. And I think that's really the biggest hurdle I have to be able to really get back into what makes this show so spectacular.
Again, that being said, I think especially with this new season, they may have started to fix that a little bit. One thing in particular, they super shortened the mat chat at the beginning of this season. I think only like 2 people were talked to at the mat chat. Usually that's like a place where you can pretty easily pick out someone who's talked to there is going to win this season. So I think the edit is starting to get a little bit smarter because they're realizing that this fan base is growing again and is paying attention to it more. And I think the show likes to think it's smarter than its fan base, even though it's not. Which is why so many people play Survivor who are fans. Again, just stop casting Cochrans. Like a Cochran every now and again is great.
Yeah.
But stop casting them all the time. I don't need a season of 12 Cochrans.
But to that, I think before we move on, I think that's kind of a good transition to my final point, is that despite there being the Cochrans, I think this show is proof that on any given season, anyone can win. You don't need to be the most physical, the smartest, the most social. Whoever has maybe strive in one of those aspects, but it's not always the strongest. It's not always the smartest. It's not always the most socially savvy. There are, especially these last handful of seasons, people that I wasn't expecting to win. And I think that is another thing that makes this show still top tier.
And I think that that's a great segue into our first segment, 4 fantastic films, or in this case, seasons. Here we will discuss 4 of our favorite seasons of Survivor and what makes them stand out. If we want to start chronologically, let's go to 2006 with Survivor season 14, Survivor Fiji. Patrick, this was your pick?
Yes. And I mean, again, I was very young when the initial season of Survivor first aired. I think the first genuine memory I have of Survivor was watching the Survivor season 5 Thailand finale while I was homesick, puking my guts out.
What a terrible finale to be watching.
Oh, exactly, right? But again, no context with it either. So I have no idea what actually happened at any point. I was also like 6 years old. But the season where I really, truly started to be like, okay, this is something, was Fiji. I was like 10 years old. I finally sort of had a concept of like how story worked and how everything sort of flowed together. And when you ask a lot of hardcore fans of the show, Fiji isn't usually one that gets a great amount of reception. I think there are a lot of cast members on this show, on this particular season, that are relative duds, especially early on. But I think there's a lot of really interesting social navigation, especially when we get into sort of the first season of the modern Immunity Idol, where it's played before the votes and the sort of strategic elements that have to get applied. The single best episode of the season is the Edgardo vote, when we get the most iconic Survivor gif of all time, where Alex and Mookie are smiling, and then they hear Edgardo's name, and their faces all just drop. And then you cut to the eventual winner of the season, Earl, who is one of my favorite Survivor players of all time, just chuckling, laughing. But that was the first real implication of the split vote, as it's known, to try and draw out an idol from somewhere, knowing that an alliance has an idol and being able to figure out, okay, this is the person we need to throw our votes on. So there's the strategic element to it. And then there's the human element of the relationship between not only Earl and Yao Man, which is the real like emotional force of the show, but what happens between Yao Man and Dreams with the car, and the last ever car that's given away on Survivor because of what happened with that whole thing, and just how gameplay and human interaction is molded together. You have Earl as the first unanimous winner at Final Tribal and a Final 3. One of the single most dominant games of all time. Only one vote against him the entire way, and that was a throwaway very early in the season. There are some weaker elements to it, but when it hits, and it really does show Survivor at its absolute best and absolute worst in some respects. at its most important moments.
For context, you bring up the Yao Man Dreams relationship. For those who are not Survivor savvy or followed all along, in this season, Yao Man, this Asian man in his 50s, had won a truck of some kind in a challenge. And he had made an agreement with this young man named Dreams, who was in his 20s at the time, like a former street performer. I think he was a cheerleading coach by the time he was on the show.
Like very recently, prior to his time on the show, was unhoused. Right. Like he had come from a very, very difficult situation. Right. And something like a car in that way was life-changing.
So Yao Man said, Dreams, for a deal, here's a deal. I will give you this car. It is yours if you promise to keep me safe at Final Four.
It wasn't even just that. No. It was, if you give me the immunity necklace at Final Four.
Thank you.
So it really works on so many different levels, right? Because for this to pay off for Yao Man, Dreams has to make it to the Final Four. Now, this was the Final Five challenge, and they sort of knew how everything was going to go, but still. But then it also means that Dreams has to win final immunity. And then when it happens, and at the final vote, when everyone looks to Dreams to say, oh, are you going to give up this immunity necklace? He doesn't. And Yao Man, in truly too good for this earth.
Oh, yeah.
And his final tribal speech it's something to behold. And despite all of the things that are coming out from all of the other members of the jury, there's just this peace, calmness, and understanding from Yao Man when he's talking to Dreams and addressing this whole thing. And it's truly one of the most underrated and beautiful moments of Survivor, even if it is sort of really like a horrible strategic play in most other circumstances.
Right. Jack, we've been going on. Any thoughts on Survivor Fiji?
I have not seen this season yet, so I'm really enjoying hearing you guys talking about it. It's making me want to now watch this season as the next season that my friend and I will watch.
So some trivia before we move on to the next one. This was the first season to have an uneven number of male and female players. We did get this is the third time they used Exile Island as a season trope. This was the first time a player quit due to illness. The family visit episode was canceled due to political turmoil in Fiji.
Do we want to go into why there were only 19 players to start this season?
Oh, feel free.
The reason why we start with 19 players is because there was a medical evacuation. I can't remember the exact details of it, but literally 24 hours before they were about to start the game. And they had no way of getting alternates out. They were literally about to go on the beach, and this person couldn't play anymore. And it's the only time this has ever happened in the history of Survivor. And it leads into a really weird scenario. And I also, Jack, I didn't touch on this either, but the whole haves versus have-nots sort of setup of Survivor Fiji is kind of wild in retrospect.
Is it like rich people versus poor people?
No, it's that in literally, so the two tribes are divided normally, right? They weren't going to do race wars or anything like that, because it's literally
they weren't going to do Cook Islands Part 2.
Yeah, because it was the one right after Cook Islands. But the whole thing of it was, at the beginning, there was sort of a project manager that was assigned to lead the two tribes to build this really nice camp for one of them. And then they just shipped off the other tribe to the other one after the first immunity. And it was oh, okay, this is how it's going to play. And it's literally it's the only time it ever happened, because they realized, no, this is dumb. But it was kind of wild.
That's crazy. I guess they saved the rich people versus poor people for Worlds Apart. So
exactly.
But with that said, I think it's time to move on to our second season we're going to talk about. And this is Jack's pick, season 23, Survivor South Pacific. Jack, since this is your pick, take it away.
Again, probably an unconventional pick for a favorite season of Survivor. This comes sort of on the heels of Heroes versus Villains, and the show is trying to find some new ways to keep people invested. Jeff Probst is now an executive producer, which means he gets to throw his ideas out. The season before this was subtitled Survivor Redemption Island, which is Redemption Island worse than Edge of Extinction?
Close.
It's a really awful addition. At least it is in season 22. For those of you who are not Survivor heads the way we are, Redemption Island was a twist in 3 seasons where any player who was voted out of the game was then sent to Redemption Island, where they could compete in challenges to get back in the game at the merge and at Final 5. So basically, if you were voted out of the game of Survivor, you weren't actually out of the game of Survivor until you lost a challenge. And again, I think that's a really dumb twist. I think when you're out of the game, you should be out of the game. But I think, surprisingly enough, it works for me really well in this season. I know for a lot of people it works better in Blood versus Water. I don't love that season as much as other people do, though, to be honest. So I think it works very well in Redemption Island. So another twist of season 23 South Pacific is that each tribe sort of has a leader who has previously played Survivor. They did the same thing with season 22, where they brought back Boston Rob and Russell Hantz. Rob won that season very easily. But this season, it was Ozzy who played 4 seasons of Survivor total, and quite possibly my favorite character of all time, Benjamin Coach Wade, who is played 3 times, played in Tokenshiens, played in Heroes versus Villains, and played in this season, South Pacific. This man is freaking crazy. His big thing is that he wants to play an honorable game, but he is maybe the most underhanded villain who has ever been on Survivor. The reason I love this season so much is because it takes the social experiment of Survivor into quite possibly the most insane realm. It starts out like a pretty normal season, and then around episode 3 or 4, you really get the sense that Coach's tribe is a cult. There's a young man on this season named Brandon Hantz, who is the nephew of the most notorious Survivor villain, Russell Hantz, who is a recently reformed Christian man who is very clearly unwell mentally and definitely should not be playing the game of Survivor at this present moment. And the things that Coach does to Brandon Hantz are dumb but evil, all for $1 million. It also has maybe my favorite winner of all time in Sophie Clark. Again, plays a very under the radar game in this season, but I think is a really interesting character, and then rushes the first half of Winners at War. Had she not gotten blinds, I will talk about this later, I think she would have won Winners at War had one vote not gone her way. One of the rewards in this season is getting to watch Jack and Jill, which, imagine if you've been on an island for 20 days and then you're told you get to go watch Adam Sandler play a man and a woman. Like, I cannot imagine the insanity of this season. It's my favorite season of this show by a good amount, actually. I don't know what you guys think of this, but I love this season.
Yeah, it's not one I really go back to. That spot, like right after Heroes versus Villains up until about Philippines, is a pretty dead spot for Survivor. It's trying to re-find its footing after what was pretty consensusly its best season ever. And it just tries to stick things at the wall, and I don't think a lot of them work. I think of those like 4 seasons, this is probably the best one. I think because of that dynamic that you spoke of, where Coach goes from kind of lunatic women's soccer coach to genuine cult leader. The merge episode is absolutely fascinating because as a result of Coach's tribe being so like strangely united, the other tribe has to do the exact same thing, and the chastisement for the flip that happens to avoid going to rocks is insane, and everything about the season and how it unfolds is insane. We'll get into one of them later, but the greatest arguably challenge run of all time from one person who willingly sacrificed himself to make sure that none of Coach's team won. Like, just there are some truly insane things that go on in this show, in this season, including poetry reading for a second.
I will say, oh God, the poetry reading is so funny. Again, that's why I like Redemption Island on this season. It's because everybody who comes to Redemption Island is kind of a character. And so Ozzy's tribe all hates each other as well, which is so fun to watch. This is the introduction of Cochrane to the show as well, who then comes back and wins Fans versus Favorites 2, who's like, kind of like this scrawny, nerdy kid who wrote like his thesis paper at Harvard on the Survivor jury. It's a really odd season all around, but again, I think it works so well. One of my favorite all-time Survivor like quotes or moments is with two women on Redemption Island, Christine and Stacy, where they refuse to call Coach and just start referring to him as Benjamin. And then Stacy launches into this monologue where she talks about how everybody on the tribe is listening to Coach's, quote, Halloween jokes, Chucky the Cheese jokes, all these kids there, 26, 22. And then she just like almost has a break with reality. It's so weird. And again, you're right. The challenge run that Ozzy goes on Redemption Island, I think is fun to watch, just because you can see that if Ozzy gets back into this game, there is no way he loses it. It does feature my favorite like cut in the history of the show, wherein Cochrane and Ozzy are together on Redemption Island, and Ozzy is telling Cochrane, like, hey, man, everybody's got a chance here. And then it just smash cuts to a talking head with Ozzy where it's like, I don't think he has a chance. And then it goes into the intro. It is awesome. It is like straight out of a sitcom mockumentary. I love this season. This season's awesome. Go back and watch this season if you haven't seen or if you haven't rewatched in a while. It's definitely worth your time.
I don't think I have anything to add, but the fact that, Jack, this is not surprising at all that this is a favorite season of yours. Knowing you, I am zero surprised. Again, I do have some trivia for those interested. This is the first time no tribe had won back-to-back challenges in a season of Survivor. This is the third season to feature a pattern in which the tribe that wins each immunity challenge alternates episodes. This is the second season in a row where a tribe gets systematically voted out. Ozzy became the first contestant to be voted out 3 times in a single season. Sophie is the second winner that was a first-time player to defeat a returning contestant at the final tribal council. And this is the season tied with David and Goliath for the most number of distinct individual immunity winners with 8. Now, before we get to my pick, we are going to jump to 2020, our fun, pandemic year, but to, I don't want to say a big divergence, but really probably the biggest Survivor event we've had to date with Survivor Season 40, Winners at War. Here, 20 returning winners all came together to compete against each other in Survivor. While this wasn't the theme, I think the kind of unofficial theme was old school versus, I'll say, middle school versus new school. They kind of had a balance of the near early Survivor winners, middle transitional period Survivor winners to more recent Survivor winners. And I thought this was a pretty fascinating season. A lot went on that, Patrick, I know you are very interested into kind of the minutia, I'll say economic dynamic of Survivor here. But what are your guys' thoughts on Winners at War?
I just talked a lot. Dan, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So this was a season that I think had a lot to try and live up to. One, all of us here, the audience, are starved for content at this point. Like, again, we're in the midst of the pandemic, just wanting something new. And fortunately, we do get this Winners at War. And to me, I liked the season a lot. I think they tried to do too much with it. We had, what do we have? We had the returning winners. The prize money went from $1 million to $2 million, though I speculate that some of these returning players were probably paid $1 million to come play in the first place. We had this fire token twist, where essentially like this economy system in Survivor for the first time. We have Edge of Extinction, because none of these people are coming on to Survivor Winners at War and not getting at least camera time for more than one episode. Hidden immunity idols, bunch of advantages on Edge of Extinction. The tribe expanded. Yeah, and here we have Tony Vlachos as the winner. Not one of my favorite Survivor players, but I will give him credit. He is a great character with his little cubbies that he hides in. He's good at making alliances, sticking with alliances, knowing when to make the right move. So I give him credit for winning. Again, my bias against Michelle may come out throughout this episode, but Michelle Fitzgerald is one of the least deserving survivors to me, so I'm glad she didn't win in the end. Though I was pulling for one of my favorite Survivor players, Natalie Anderson, to win in the end. I think Tony did what he needed to win the season. What I think was unfortunate is I don't think the old school players did their homework in how to adapt to the new school kind of style where it's fast and loose with the strategy right away and not so much playing too hard, which I don't think is how I would describe this new school system, but just like people get into it right away. Any little move is critiqued and criticized, and I don't think the old school players caught up fast in time. So that's why I think we saw a lot of those, what we saw Amber, we saw Danny, we saw Ethan Zahn, Boston Rob, Sandra, Parvati, Yule all get voted off. Like these quote unquote old school players get picked off right at the beginning. And we saw these new school players kind of take advantage of that.
To be fair to the old schoolers, there's also a disproportionate number of old school versus new school. There's like 7 or 8 people who played before Heroes versus Villains in this season. And you have like every winner from the 30s except for Worlds Apart.
Which you easily explainable. Yeah, it was a lot, and I think I'll flip this. I think if Coach is the lawful evil alignment in D&D, Tony is very clearly chaotic neutral. And so your mileage varies with him like completely. I personally love watching Tony just go from 0 to 100 to 200 to 300 to 4. Like the man never stops. He is liquid cocaine on a Survivor island, which doesn't make sense because he should be depleted from, being on an island with no food. I think I ultimately was rooting for him ahead of Natalie specifically because I'm much like Jack. Anyone who gets voted out of Survivor should not be able to win Survivor. But also, I'm not too mad about Michelle. Again, I think Go Wrong and that sort of stretch in the early 30s is when I got really, 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 really into Survivor. And
I'm just a big Aubrey fan. I thought she was a deserved winner. So maybe it's not so much I'm bitter at Michelle because I thought the bitter jury was too bitter at Aubrey.
Yes.
Anyway.
And this is the classic debate. The Survivor fandom is bitter jury versus jury management. Is it your job to formulate the relationships in a way that allows you to win, or is it the jury's job to look past certain personal slights to award the specific type of game that may cause people to get pissed off? There's no right answer to it, and it really does vary season by season. And so it's just that I think Go Wrong is like the ultimate version of that particular statement and debate because Aubrey versus Michelle, I think, is going to last as a debate for a very, very long time. It's only because Jeff Probst really likes Aubrey.
I do think this season had one of my favorite blind sides, which is a lot to say. There's been some great ones. Micronesia one with, the 4 horsemen
the Black Widow
taking
Brigade
out, the Black Widow Brigade. Yeah.
Easily the best, I think, blind side or like strategy move in Survivor history. And the fact that Suri Fields has never won Survivor is a crime. The fact that she's going to hopefully win Big Brother, although I don't know, I haven't.
It's not looking good for her. It's not looking good for her right now.
Oh, yikes!
But she did win the Traitors on Peacock,
which Sandra and Parvati are on for the new season of.
But to my point, the move that Cedar Rapids native Denise made against 2-time winner Sandra, where she essentially blindsided her with her own hidden immunity idol, Chef's Kiss. Denise was someone I was pulling for heavily before that happened. Post that, I was really wishing she'd go further than she did, but that's the game.
So for me, this is one of those seasons, again, it was one of the earlier seasons that I watched. Really liked watching it initially. Going back and thinking about it, this season has sort of soured for me. I think the boot order for this season absolutely sucks.
Yeah, it's bad.
It's terrible that we lose so many old school players so quickly and so early. And the fact that I have to sit and watch Sarah and Ben for like the last 4 or 5 episodes is horrible. I think season 38, Edge of Extinction, literally only exists so that they can bring it back for this season. Because again, there's no way that you're going to have this all winner season and not have all these winners on camera for a decent amount of time. That being said, I think this season is a season of moments rather than an overall good season. I think Ethan carrying the logs on Edge of Extinction is a great moment. The Denise blindside is a great moment. I think, or moment, as Tony would say. Again, Tony's extortion, where he's reading over the note, where he's like, I get to extort somebody, and then it says this advantage is being played against you, is a great moment. But overall, I don't think it's the most coherent season of the show. And I think that it could have been if we had just lost some of the dead weight in the time that we lost the old school players. I have not watched Millennials versus Gen X, but I cannot imagine that Adam Klein was happy with his edit in this season. The fact that they take like 20 seconds to show him not being able to get his torch down at one of the tribal councils. And I don't know, it's a weird season because, again, I think the family visit in this season is amazing. I think it's one of the best Survivor moments ever. But the season as a whole just, I don't think really works all that well, unfortunately.
Totally fair. And again, I think a lot of it is the spectacle around it. Like I said, it's hard to live up to how they were pitching it. But I just remember how I felt having Survivor in that time. It was nice, this big event. I would love them to do another big event like this at 50, but what that is, who knows? I don't think they'll get all these winners again, but it would be like, do it like a second chance again. Maybe like all the runners up. Do something, give them a chance to do it. I'd like to see another big event once we hit the 5 seasons from now.
I'm sure we will. It's just a question of what that event's going to be. Also, bring back reunions, just in general. Like, I miss the live reunion shows.
Yeah, I agree.
Those have inspired many just truly outrageous things ever. Like,
I just remember Jerry getting booed off.
Yep. The Caramoan one where they only sat the people who made the merge on stage or made the jury on stage, and like everyone else was just in the front row.
Russell Hantz shit talking Brandon's game at the South Pacific reunion.
The live vote reveal for Second Chance, where you had just like 6 people depressed because they weren't going back on Survivor.
Mayim Bialik defending Colton.
Oh,
Sia giving money to Ty.
Yeah, bring back the reunions. That's what we're trying to say.
Really.
Well, the last season we are going to talk about is my pick. I wouldn't necessarily say this is my favorite season. Probably give that to Micronesia. But I did want to talk about a new school era Survivor season, because I think we've talked about some older seasons at this point, and Winners at War was kind of this outlier. So I want to talk about the most recent completed season, Survivor 44. They're at Fiji since forever now. The last bunch of seasons are in Fiji, but I felt like for the longest time we kind of hit this cast lull. It's like Jack said earlier, we had been casting a lot of fans, and I'm sure that was still the case with this one, but to me this is easily the best cast, almost top to bottom, that Survivor has seen in at least 6-7 seasons. You have, from the first episode, someone getting medically evacuated. You have a showmance between Dorky, Matt, and Franny. You have Franny, who's on the outs, playing her butt off. This woman that you would not think would be a challenge beast, being a challenge beast, doing what she can to survive. And then I think the biggest, most interesting thing about this season was the dynamic between eventual winner Jam Jam and 2 of his tribe mates, Carson Garrett, and then Carolyn, this recently sober mom who, heart on her sleeve is an understatement. Like, she was a very emotional player who still had a strategic edge to her. But at one point, their tribe got so whittled down to the 3 of them. And then when the merge happened, they became swing votes because the other 2 bigger tribes, once they merged, were going after each other. So I don't think a group of 3 people in a minority stuck in the middle played a game any better to make it nearly to the final 3 altogether. You have this young woman named Jamie who thought she was playing the best game ever and had zero clue what was going on. Danny, who is this kind of challenge beast. You had Kane, this really nerdy guy who was just happy to be there. So many great characters. You had Matthew, who seemed like he was my pick to win, and then he jumps off a frickin' cliff and busts up his knee.
And his shoulder.
His shoulder, thank you. A lot of great characters. There wasn't a lot of fluff after the first couple votes.
Yeah, I think this season will go down as one of the better seasons of the new era, and this season in which the new era has started to find its footing. That being said, I think the Tika 3 are excellent. I think Matt and Franny are excellent, and I could not care less about everybody else who's on this season. I thought Jamie was such an annoying player. I'm so sorry.
Oh, she was. But that's what made me she was comedic value to me. It's she thought she was playing such a savvy game, and at the end of it, knew nothing. She knew nothing that was going on.
Everybody else just kind of felt like they were there, just kind of chilling. I don't really remember anything brilliant about Heidi's game other than the fact that she made fire in 3 minutes, which is impressive. Lauren's game as well, not super memorable to me, but I'm sure there was stuff that she did. I mean, she made it to Final 5. So yeah, I don't know. This is definitely a good season. And it was one that I really enjoyed getting to watch in the real time, because I haven't done that except once when I watched San Juan del Sur season 29 in real time, because I liked Natalie and Nadia from The Amazing Race. Yeah, I don't know. This is a good season though.
Patrick, I don't believe you've watched this, so I won't, force you to discuss Survivor 44.
Not a single second, but according to Carson Garrett's Wikipedia page, Sia hosted a house party for 3 contestants from Survivor 44 and gave out $15,000 to him for his performance. So, Sia still living long in the minds and hearts of Survivor fans and players everywhere.
I will say, you brought up something that I think is still a big gripe I have about this new era of Survivor, and that is the importance of fire making as we get down to the final 4. I think it just is a wrench in the game that, I don't want to say ruins it, but it takes away some of the tough decisions that need to be made. When the decision is, do I give up my immunity necklace to make fire or not? Too much weight is put on that. And I think Heidi, who did that, she's like, I won the challenge. I'm giving it up to go against the best fire maker in Carson, thinking that's going to be what puts her over the edge. I'm glad it didn't in the end.
It got her 1 vote.
Right. But I don't like that is now part of the decision making that these players have to make, and not just the social dynamic. Who's gonna help me win? Who do I have to go up against? It takes some agency out of the voting.
You know what would really help this? Final 2, not a final 3. Bring back final 2s.
Bring back
Final 2 is so much more interesting than Final 3. I'm sorry. That might be a hot take. I think a Final 2 is way more interesting than a Final 3.
Bring back contentious juries,
villains, and Final 2s where someone can make the horrible decision that loses them $1 million.
Yeah.
Also known as the woo.
The woo. I'd be the dumbest contestant in Survivor history not to take calf. Doesn't take calf.
Oh man. Well, I do think we could probably keep talking about Survivor for a long time.
We already have.
That's true. That is true. But I think it's time to get into our fantastic fan castings. Here, each of us will cast 4 main members of the Fantastic Four: Reed Richards, Sue Storm, Johnny Storm, Ben Grimm, and their nemesis, Dr. Doom, with a former contestant on Survivor. Patrick, as our guest, you have the honor of sharing your cast first.
Thank you, Dan. I think the very important thing to take into consideration for this is through the lens of one Mr. Jeff Probst. If Jeff Probst is going to cast the Fantastic Four, there's really only, I think, 2 choices that you can make for someone like Reed Richards, the main character, the leader, and ostensibly, who is Jeff Probst's biggest man crush? I've gone with, I think, the secondary option for this. His original man crush, runner-up, season 2, Australian Outback, 5th place finisher on Survivor Heroes vs. Villains. I'm, of course, talking about the participant in the greatest joke ever told about Survivor, from that one episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm when he's invited to a Holocaust dinner as a survivor, Mr. Colby Donaldson. Fun fact, that was originally supposed to be Ethan Zahn because he was Jewish, except Ethan can't act, so it became Colby instead. But I think in Jeff Probst's mind, who he wants to be the main person, who he wants to see succeed, specifically because Boston Rob has won a season of Survivor, to be able to put Colby in that position as the leader of the Fantastic Four, so to speak, I think is one real feather in his cap and is, I think, a no-brainer from that perspective.
Have you gone back and seen Colby lose that Final Five challenge in Heroes versus Villains, and how disappointed Jeff Probst is to have to give immunity to Parvati?
Incredibly. And it's only, the humor in that is only topped by the family visit from Heroes versus Villains, where his brother Reed and him are just shouting at each other constantly because they can't get the challenge right. Truly, just Colby in Heroes versus Villains is such a shell of himself from Australian Outback. It's an insane character study.
Best confessional ever as well, I will say.
My Sue Storm is another person who came, I think basically all of my picks except one is someone who came very, very close, but just can't quite get over the hump. 2-time finalist, runner-up in season 16, Amanda Kimmel to pick as my Sue Storm. I think someone who, even though Jeff is wildly infatuated with Parvati by, again, continuously bringing her on the show and bringing her up as much as possible, Amanda always felt like the second fiddle to Parvati. She felt like the second fiddle to Courtney in China, second fiddle to basically everyone on the Heroes tribe in Heroes versus Villains. And I think as Sue Storm, and in Jeff's mind, because Jeff likes his alpha males, the leading lady can't really cast herself ahead of Reed Richards in this case. As I move on to my Johnny Storm, I will preface this by saying to those Survivor nerds out there, I do understand the implication of doing this. Don't worry, I've thought this through. Mentioned earlier, as a result of Jack's season pick, Ozzy as my Johnny Storm. I think this one is a no-brainer, an absolute challenge beast, and really the number one personality type, like just the best fit to what Johnny Storm is as a character from Survivor. My Ben Grimm, a little bit of fate, I guess, with taking Ben Driebergen as my Ben Grimm. Just fits into that mold, I think, and what the mold that Jeff sees him. And again, just someone that Jeff is wildly in love with for the amount of time he was given on both of his seasons and just the focus. Of the 5 I've casted, he is the only person to have won Survivor, but I also think his character type is a little harder to cast than the other 3 members of the Fantastic Four. And finally, my Victor Von Doom, probably the person Jeff Probst hates the most in the history of Survivor, came 3rd in his first season, was the ultimate villain of Survivor up until that point. And then when he came back, was unfortunately forced off painkillers after being punched in the face by Danny Bonaducci at some awards show, won Mr. Johnny Fairplay. Dead Grandma is the ultimate villain move in the history of Survivor, even if his best friend really did not know what they were doing with that. And there is something great about a weasel playing Victor Von Doom and trying to work this into a pitch and trying to have it overall that I think is a really interesting thought exercise, especially against the backdrop of All-American Colby Donaldson.
Great picks. Definitely a few of those that I was considering myself. Ozzy was definitely at the top of my list for Johnny before you submitted your picks. Yeah, no real qualms about who you pick. So with that said, Jack, who are you casting?
Okay, so I went about this a little bit differently. I did think a little bit about Jeff Probst and who he might want to see back on seasons. But at the same time, I was also thinking about which Survivor contestants would sort of fit into different molds for Fantastic Four characters. So as my Reed Richards, I picked the winner of Survivor season 31, 10th place finisher in Survivor season 29, and the 8th place finisher in Survivor season 40, Jeremy Collins. Jeremy is a firefighter from Foxborough, Massachusetts, who's essentially like a leader of his tribe. Jeremy has this sort of strategy that he uses in the game, which are meat shields, where you want to keep somebody in the game who's more powerful or seen as a bigger threat than you still in the game as long as you can, and then take them out later in the game. This is a strategy that really works for him well in season 31 because of the whole way that voting blocks end up sort of shaking out in that season. But it doesn't really work for him in Winners at War because he gets outplayed by somebody who uses the meat shield strategy better, which is Tony. But I think Jeremy is like classic type A leader. I think he would be a very good Reed Richards. For my Sue Storm, I picked an under-the-radar winner and somebody who tends to play the game very under the radar, though I think that her game is quite impressive, to be honest, and it's the season that I'm currently watching. Tina Weston, winner of Survivor Australian Outback, the first boot in Survivor All-Stars because she was a winner, and then the fourth place finisher in Blood versus Water. Again, I think Tina played a really, really good game in Australia. I think she played an okay game in Blood versus Water, and then she played basically no game in All Stars. Her win in Australia and watching the way that she is being edited is super interesting. So I think she would be a really, really good Sue Storm. You know, again, playing invisible, but when she's ready, she'll knock you out. For Johnny Storm, I picked noted hothead in the Survivor community, Spencer Bledsoe, who appeared in Survivor season 28 and received fourth place, and Survivor season 31 and tied for runner-up because both he and the other finalist received no votes because Jeremy won the jury unanimously because Jeremy played the best game easily in that season. Spencer has often been described as the Charlie Brown of Survivor in that he just can't quite get to that football no matter how many times he tries. But I think Spencer is such a fascinating character. I loved watching him in Second Chance. I have not watched Cagayan yet, which I know I need to because everybody loves that season. Again, from watching a little bit of Cambodia, I know that his dynamic with Cass is the stuff of legend. But I picked Spencer for literally one reason, and it's the speech that he gives at the Final Four of Cambodia, wherein he essentially shouts at Jeremy, if you vote me out tonight, I will make sure every single person on that jury votes for Kelly Wentworth, and there is nothing that you can do about it, so you better take me to the Final Three, Jeremy. And then Jeremy's like, okay, you just lost yourself the game by doing that. I will gladly take you to the Final Three. Spencer is a part of the Braves tribe in season 28, and his tribe absolutely falls apart in the first few episodes. That I do know. It's one of the most incredible destructions of a tribe ever. So yeah, that's my Johnny Storm. For my Ben Grimm, I really wanted to pick an old school player because I know that Tina's like played in like different eras. But I wanted to pick someone who was like very strictly old school. And so for that, I picked Big Tom, who makes fourth place in Survivor Africa and fifth place in Survivor All-Stars, who has one of the most legendary jury speeches in both seasons, wherein he babbles incoherent nonsense at Ethan in Survivor Africa. Ethan, if a hyena came through camp and he ate our mush, and then after he ate it, he turned around and licked his hind end, did he do it because that was the animal instinct or because to get the taste of the mush out of his mouth? Real quote from Big Tom. And then in season 8, he gets screwed by Rob and Amber, as everybody does in that season, because the only people that Rob and Amber were screwing other than their tribe was each other. And it makes it seem as though he's going to forgive Rob and go to shake his hand. And then before he can do it, he pulls away from Rob and says, "Don't be stupid, stupid." It is one of the greatest moments in reality TV history. I love it. And then for my Victor Von Doom, I picked Benjamin, not Coach. Wasn't what he was born with. It wasn't Coach. It was Benjamin. Fifth place in Tocantins, 12th place in Heroes versus Villains, second place in South Pacific. Frontman for the Dragons. All-timer. I love Coach.
I love the Shadow to the Dragons. Heroes versus Villains had the single best Ponderosa content, I think, ever. Dragons forever.
Well, for my cast, a lot more old school players with one exception. With my Reed Richards, I'm going to assume this is who Patrick meant as one of the other ones. That is probably the quintessential Survivor player, Boston Rob. I think when you think Survivor, even casual or even non-casual, like people know just in the zeitgeist that who Boston Rob is. Classic Red Sox hat, he was 10th in Markakis, 2nd in All-Stars, 13th in Heroes versus Villains before finally getting his win in probably the easiest win in Survivor history in Redemption Island. Unfortunately got 17th in Winners at War, but he was also famously one of the 2 idols along with Sandra in Island of the Idols. So, big honor to him there. He exudes leadership. He's a very strategic, smart player. Easily the first person that came to mind when I thought about Reed Richards. Second, I went with someone who I've talked about a couple of times on this episode already. One of my all-time favorite Survivor players who never found it to the winner's circle, and that's Aubrey Bracco. She got second runner-up, or she was runner-up on Kalrong, Brains versus Brawn versus Beauty, 5th in Game Changers, and finished 16th in Edge of Extinction. I think Aubrey is someone who exudes the trope of like finding yourself and not knowing what you can accomplish when you go out onto a show like this. I don't think she knew what she was capable of, and I think she was one of the characters and one of the players that really personified this. And I feel like this would be something you could definitely see in a Sue Storm, like not trusting her abilities and being kind of second fiddle to Reed until really showing what she can do. For Johnny Storm, I went with someone who just kind of does his own thing. He got 5th place on Tokendine's Heroes versus Villains, finished 15th. He ended up winning Blood versus Water season 27 and finished 11th in Winners at War, and that's Tyson Apostle. I feel like this dude doesn't give a shit about anything. Like he not so much to the villain, but like he'll use people how he needs to. He'll tell people what they want to hear, but let other people make kind of that next step move that really got him. So I don't want to say he's a hothead, but more that like he's doing his own thing and he's going to accomplish it the way he wants to. And that's kind of where I see the Johnny Storm in it. For my Ben Grimm, I cast someone who has been on the show 4 times. He finished 8th in Pearl Islands, 4th in All-Stars, 6th in Heroes versus Villains, and then was the first one out in Blood versus Water. Big guy, lovable guy, and that's Rupert Bonham. I think most of you would know him as the big hairy guy with the tie-dye tank top. And I think that pretty much is all you need to know on why you cast him as Ben Grimm. Big, lovable, pretty simple. Pretty much all there is to it. I'm going to break my own rule, and I'm not going to tell you who I cast as Dr. Doom now. I'm going to save that for my pitch because I want to.
Okay, I'm excited. With our shows now cast, it is time to pitch our Fantastic Four Survivor show.
But before we get into those pitches, I have one question. Is the show set in the MCU?
How? I guess is my question.
Because you want it to.
Yeah, I don't think so, because mine is very squarely set as part of some weird alternate Survivor universe where we're like putting a couple things that happened in Survivor into this show because I have found no other place in this podcast to talk about them, and I really need to talk about them.
I mean, remember, the multiverse exists, Patrick.
That's fair, but does this... I'm not going to get into that.
Jack, what about you?
God, I wish this was set in the MCU. And you know what? I'm going to choose to believe that this is a multiverse, actually. However, Jeff Probst is still Jeff Probst and has powers where he can give himself as much Botox as he needs.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of the same boat. Like, sure, multiverse exists. It's in the MCU, maybe not in the, the main universe, but sure, this can be a Disney Plus show somehow. Now that we have that question answered, Patrick, let's hear your Fantastic Four Survivor pitch.
Okay, so the traditional format of Survivor starts in one of 2 ways. You either have, at this point, a 20-person season or an 18-person season. Originally started as 16, but 2 tribes of 10, 3 tribes of 6. I'm going to be going down the 3 tribes of 6 route. This is a way for me to be able to, as it starts out and when it gets to the merge, because I'm really not going to focus on too much outside of what the final 5 would be, and the final 5, of course, being our 5 main cast members. But I do want to hit on a couple of things. So at the onset, Reed and Victor, being played by Fairplay and Colby, and really assuming the characteristics of the real people and not so much the Fantastic Four characters, are on one tribe. Ben Grimm is on one tribe, and Johnny and Sue are on one tribe. For the purposes, again, because it is cast as Amanda and Ozzy, they are not related in the show, because that would be fucking weird. Survivor does a lot of weird shit, and I don't think they'd go here. So yeah, that's sort of the initial divide. Reed and Victor become close friends. They're really the tight core part of the alliance on Tribe 1. They're the first people they knock out. The first boot, who is this really, really excited chicken farmer who goes by chicken and screams, hot damn, once he gets voted out first. Again, mirroring from Survivor China, the single greatest moment, funniest moment on the show in the show's history. Besides maybe this next one, in which slightly after the merge, after these tribes coalesced, there was no tribe swap. It's just a straight sort of Philippines-esque thing where it's like, okay, we're going 3 tribes right to the merge. We get to the merge, and Ben Grimm's closest ally, former professional baseball player, Jeff Kent, gets voted out. And then he goes on a post-show rant about how Joe Biden would have taken 40% of his money anyway, even though he had played 20 years in the major leagues. And this all sets up our final 5. Our final 5, of course, being the 5 main members of the cast. To this point, the Fantastic Four really haven't been united in that way. It's really been sort of it's 3 and 2 very much, with Reed, Victor, and then taking in Ben from the sort of loser, the quote-unquote Matt Sang tribe from Survivor Philippines, which was the tribe that basically lost all of the challenges going into the merge. Them sort of bringing Ben into the fold and sort of loosely having Sue and Johnny on the outskirts of the alliance. Very clearly looking for a Reed and Victor final 2. But of course, because it's Victor Von Doom, he realizes this, and he thinks to himself, how am I going to get ahead of this guy who everybody seems to love, including the guy that's hosting the show? So he plays a little bit between Johnny and Reed, and he notices that they maybe both have an affinity for Sue, and he plays off that, and he realizes that. And he gets Reed to sort of come with him, try to get him to vote out Johnny at the final 6 before these 5 really can like solidify themselves. And Reed isn't having it. And so he goes the other way. And he goes, you know what? I'm going to flip on him. At this point, there's nothing for me to do. I can't really win. And then the worst thing possible happens. Reed wins immunity. And so they go on, they get to the final 5 because he can't execute his plan right away. And so he tries again at final 5. But this time, he wins immunity again. Because it's Colby Donaldson, right? He's going to keep winning immunity. And it's these fierce competitions between Reed and Johnny to win these immunity challenges. And he just can't get it done. He can't get it done. So he thinks about the second best option, which is, okay, how do I get them now to come together to vote out Sue? Because they can see, oh, she's two-timing us. She's going with the other one. She's more interested in the other one. So he comes in together, tries to get some weird, like, Meninist thing to go and, like, vote out Sue Storm in this case. It happens, and so the final 4 is the final 4. And for once, Reed loses the immunity challenge going into a final 3. And yes, I know I'm not really talking about Ben all that much. He's really just a swing vote and really just is ancillary to the whole plot of Reed versus Victor in my head and with this. And so Johnny finally wins final immunity. And we're not playing in some bullshit fire challenge season. We're like, this is a vote at final 4. And it basically comes down to which of the two of them is going to be able to win out over the other in the minds and hearts of one Ben Grimm. And Ben, through all of this, has noticed how Victor has tried to constantly play the other two off of each other and finally pulls the trigger and Victor loses. In the end, it doesn't really matter who wins, mostly because I haven't thought about that. But it is the notion of defeating one Mr. Johnny Fairplay that is so appealing to one Jeff Probst for this particular season that everything just moves off into the sunset, and he fails to write an ending because he really doesn't care, because he just hates Johnny Fairplay.
Awesome. Incredible. I'd watch it.
I would watch that so many times over and over.
I'm curious, what does the immunity idol necklace look like?
Because, I mean, I didn't really talk about the powers, but they obviously still all have their powers, so it has to be flame retardant in some way. I'm guessing it's just like pure, made out of like, I don't even know what it's
like adamantium or something.
Adamantium, vibranium, just like,
there you go.
Just this vibranium. Yeah, because it's being shown, it's Survivor. You know what? Fuck it. It's in the MCU. It's vibranium. Yes! It's being shot in Wakanda. They're finally going back to Africa after nearly 30 seasons.
Survivor Wakanda.
Survivor Wakanda. It's made out of vibranium. Everything's fine. There's clearly no black people in this show because, again, that's just something Jeff Probst would do. Cast Survivor Wakanda and just have it be all white people.
I don't know how I'm going to top that. So, Jack, I'll give you a crack at topping that first with your your MCU Survivor pitch.
Great. So, I decided to go for the 20-person 2 Tribes of 10 cast. This is Survivor Power to the People. We start with 2 boats with 10 contestants approaching an island. We see on that boat a beautiful godlike man, of course, James Clement from Survivor seasons 15, 16, and 20, as Thor. A lot of these contestants are thinking, I got this, no problem. But a lot of them are forgetting a major factor. I'm a freaking god. Over on the other boat, we see a man in a cape with glasses. This is, of course, Stephen Fishback. I was the most renowned surgeon in my field before a life-changing car crash. In that time, I've seen dimensions you wouldn't believe. 39 days on an island, try 39 years in the mirror realm. Back to the first boat, we see Cass McQuillan, of course, as Jennifer Walters. Survivor is a social game, and there's no one who's more social than a lawyer. But at the same time, I can't really tell anybody that, because who wants to give $1 million to a lawyer? And then we get the Jeff Probst spiel of, these 20 Americans are about to embark on the greatest journey of their lifetime. They have to work together or they'll be voted out of the tribe. 39 days, 20 people, 1 survivor. We now meet our cast. On the Sakaar tribe, we have Thor, James Clement. We have Vision, Rob Mariano. We have Victor Von Doom, Benjamin Coach Wade. We have Bruce Banner, Ethan Zahn. We have Reed Richards, Jeremy Collins. We have Valkyrie, Suri Fields. We have Wanda Maximoff, Amber Mariano. We have Hella, Sandra Diaz-Twine. We have Yelena Belova, Amanda Kimmel. And we have Jennifer Walters, Cass McQuillan. Reed gets a Matt Chat moment. Von Doom gets a Matt Chat moment. We immediately sort of start to see some rivalry between the two of them. And then over on the Morag tribe, we have Eric Killmonger, Wendell Holland, winner of Survivor Ghost Island, Ben Grimm, Big Tom, as stated earlier, Johnny Storm, Spencer Bledsoe, Namor, Ozzy, Doctor Strange, Stephen Fishback, Shuri, Marianne Okech, who is the winner of Survivor 42, Carol Danvers, Kim Spradlin, Nebula, Sophie Clark, Natasha Romanoff, the Black Widow, Parvati Shallow, that's a given, and Sue Storm, Tina Wesson. So immediately, these are our 2 tribes, and we sort of start to go through, but what's power to the people? That's sort of what we're trying to discuss here. So power to the people is a new twist that's been added to the game, because what does Survivor love? A twist. The second that all of these people stepped on that island, they lost their powers. All of these sorcerers, gods, assassins, whatever, the Fantastic Four, they can't use any sort of powers that they had. They have to play this game as people who have been stripped of something, because again, we got to get Survivor back to taking as much away from people rather than giving them unlimited amounts of rights. So as the season sort of starts to go along, we of course see that there are some new twists that are involved. We have the Raft, which is a place where a contestant can go off to potentially get a chance to regain their power for the next immunity challenge. We have a new form of the fire token as well, because I can tell Jeff Probst desperately wants to bring back the fire tokens. We have every sort of immunity idol that you can think of. Of course, the immunity idol is Mjolnir, so only Thor is able to actually use it. The immunity idol that we look at for like the tribe immunity is the Avengers A. Eventually, honestly, that's kind of all I have for the pitch. I didn't have a super clear outline for this, like how I'd see the season going. I'm sure that we get into a lot of different dynamics, but I just think it would be really interesting to see the characters from the Marvel Universe put on an island where they don't have their powers and are forced to compete with each other in these sort of social physical challenges. I put way more thought into my cast than I did my actual pitch. But yeah, Survivor, Power to the People, featuring all of the best Survivor contestants as MCU characters.
Incredible. More so that I think you and I were on like parallel paths with our pitches, as you're about to hear. But yeah, I'm definitely down with Power to the People. But for my pitch, I'm going with Survivor Heroes versus Villains 2. In this scenario, Dr. Doom is bored. We're in the middle of the pandemic still. It's been going on for like 5 years at this point in this universe. I need something. Jeff Probst caught COVID and he can't host, so he's going to go host Survivor. And in like Secret Wars fashion, he pulls a bunch of Fantastic Four members and some other heroes who have been members of the Fantastic Four, and 9 villains from Survivor to compete in Heroes versus Villains. So the villains are actually Survivor villains, not MCU villains playing anyone. On top of the Fantastic Four that we had mentioned, we also have Malcolm playing Franklin Richards. We have Kim Spradlin playing Valeria Richards. We have Natalie Anderson as She-Hulk. And we have Suri as Miss Thing. And finally, we have Carson Garrett playing Spider-Man, Peter Parker. For the villains, we just have Richard Hatch from winner of Season 1, Parvati Shallow, Jeff Varner, Cass McQuellen, Sandra Diaz-Twine, Colton Cumby, Shan Smith, John Rocker, and David Sampson. But to even the odds, rather than everyone losing their powers, Dr. Doom has given the villains powers. For the most part, it all backfired. A lot of them are terrible people and done terrible things in the game, and they just eat each other apart. And it's mostly the heroes in the end who have to kind of work down, except for Sandra and Parvati. They're still in this. They're kind of the swing votes as this goes along. The challenges are like super puzzles and super feats of strength and all this stuff. We bring back the auction, and this is where David Sampson loses. He loses all of his fire tokens, and that's, for whatever reason, that gets him voted out because he was just terrible with money. Because, yeah, David Sampson sucks. Rod had been voted off pretty early once it got down to it because no one thought they could beat him in the end. So he was kind of cannon fodder once it was mostly the heroes voting. And in the end, the final 4 were Sue, played by Aubrey Bracco, Ben, played by Rupert Barnum, Johnny, played by Tyson Apostle, and Sandra, who pretty much was just like, whoever, as long as it's not me this whole time, her normal strategy, as long as it's not me, whoever. Well, it gets down to Aubrey, who had won immunity in the last immunity challenge, and Sue decides to go against Ben to make fire, and Ben, rather than using flint, uses his own body to create a spark faster, which ultimately leads to Aubrey again not winning like she should because she's been playing the best game this whole time. But in the end, it's actually Sandra who wins because, of course, it's Sandra who wins, and despite being the last villain of the villain tribe, she ends up winning because as long as it's not me. Sandra beats out Ben Grimm and Johnny because no one wanted to go up against Johnny in a fire competition for obvious reasons. I also imagine Exile Island's back, but like when you get voted out, you're just exiled to an island forever. You don't actually come back. You're just exiled there. But the final twist is at the reunion show, Dr. Doom pulls off his mask to reveal it was actually Jeff Probst the whole time. We can't not have Survivor without Jeff Probst. The whole COVID thing was a ruse.
Jeff Probst created COVID so that he could be Dr. Doom. You guys, there was a new twist that we added, a global pandemic.
So that's my pitch. Again, clearly my cast had more thought put into it than the actual pitch, because at the heart of it, Survivor is still Survivor. No matter what twists and turns you put into it, it's people competing and voting each other out viciously.
Exactly, and I am so glad that it exists.
Patrick, I encourage you to get back into it, just more so we have more things to talk about, but I understand if you don't want to.
Yeah, I probably will. I'm just disappointed in myself that I didn't get. I wanted to keep the my focus today squarely on American Survivor. I did mention the international seasons, but I probably could have.
Well, you said Australian Survivor is pretty darn good.
It is. It's very. Season 2 of Australian Survivor is my actual favorite season of the show of all time.
Well, I might have to give it a watch.
Yeah. Also, Dan, I know you're not a Michelle fan, but she's kind of killing it on the challenge.
Oh, no, I know. She's fine on the challenge. I have no problem with her. Again, my beef is more that Aubrey should have won. And I think she did a decent job on Winners of War, too. No, go watch the challenge, too. I like the challenge.
Yeah, the Challenge USA is kind of fun. Chris Underwood from Survivor is also crushing the challenge right now.
Somehow.
Somehow.
After stepping on his own foot constantly, is somehow doing all right. But again, also someone that I respect winning because it was in the confines of the rule of the season of Redemption Island, but still dumb.
A flop winner. Let's call a spade a spade.
Right. There you have it. Our castings, our pitches for a Jeff Probst produced Fantastic Four Survivor show are done. We hope you, the listeners, enjoyed our exploration into this what-if scenario. We want to make a special note that the Fantastic Four podcast is hosted for free on Spotify Podcasts, formerly known as Anchor, and we encourage you, if you have your own podcast idea, to check it out. It is really a great resource for getting your idea off the ground. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube.
If you're listening on YouTube, we would greatly appreciate you hitting the subscribe button and commenting with who your Survivor cast would be, on what you thought of our lists and pitches, and on which director you would like to see next.
I also want to thank Matt Hart and Maddie Gunner for the fantastic theme music they created for us. And I certainly want to thank you, Patrick, for being our guest today. I hope you enjoyed your return to the show. And please, tell our listeners where else they can find you.
They can find me in my house, and if they do, that's weird.
There you have it. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Dan Bettenhausen.
And I'm Jack Mayer.
And on behalf of our guest, Patrick Gibson, we hope you all stay fantastic.